Wulf with the fourth and final part of Speaking About Israel. In this part, I'll illustrate how to avoid the three no's on the topic of the violence that followed the Third Gaza War. The way we American Jews reacted to this violence closely paralleled how both the Israelis and the Palestinians reacted. The predominant response was blame. Blame for initiating attacks and blame for retaliation. In addition, the fact that the violence was centered in Jerusalem and started on the Temple Mount allowed for the obvious historical justifications and moral arguments. And, predictably, the violence was pointed to as yet another example of why the other side cannot be trusted. So, how does one talk about the outbreak of violence while upholding the three no's? I have found it best to focus on each side separately when considering the underlying reasons for violence breaking out. In the following presentation, you'll see that I approach the issue by looking separately at an Israeli perspective, a Gazan Palestinian perspective, and a West Bank Palestinian perspective. Now, this isn't the only perspective from each of these groups, but certainly it's a common perspective. So let's take a look at the Israeli perspective. 2/3 of Israelis believe in a two-state solution and the peace process. 2/3. Also 2/3, not necessarily the same 2/3, but also 2/3 believe it'll never happen. So when the Kerry Peace Initiative failed, there really wasn't much of a to and fro on the street in Israel. Yeah, we thought so. Next. So that was the end of the Kerry Peace Initiative. A lot of us over here, I think, had more hope than that. But within Israel, it was another one of the roller coaster rides of hope and dash and hope and dash. Then came a number of important elements, and I can't go through all of them, but basically the murder of the 3 teenagers, rocket fire from Gaza, and the Gaza War. Now, during the Gaza War, Netanyahu, as you know, went in on the ground, and he was pressed, quite dramatically so, from his right, and some in the Likud itself, but mainly from his right, to go further into Gaza. Not to stop, but to demilitarize Gaza once and for all. Because this was now the Third Gaza War. He decided not to do that. The risks were too great. Decided not to do that. So the Gaza War ended essentially with a situation pretty much the same as it was in the first Gaza War in 08-09, 2012, and then 2014. Pretty much the same situation. So it was very clear that the chances of finding a military solution to the Gaza wars was not possible. We were on the brink, they were on the brink of, by the way, I mix up we and they all the time, so forgive me, I'm talking about Israel. So we were in a situation where it was understood that the military solution to this conflict in Gaza was not going to, in fact, be possible. And what we were faced with was that there needed to be a negotiated arrangement. So what was at the end of the Gaza War? Hamas is still in power. The capacity to rearm, to produce weapons and rockets still exists within Gaza. And the ability to create more and dig more and create more of those tunnels, those tunnels between Israel and Gaza, there is still the capacity within Hamas. In fact, just recently you might have heard that there was a strike by Israel on one of the cement factories, but that capability is still there. So after that, terrorist attacks worsened, the frustration grew, elections were called, and really the countdown to the next Gaza war has begun. I didn't say it's going to be a fun evening, okay? The Hamas perspective. Here we have Gaza, Egypt, and Israel. Now, I've got to go back to more than 1 year before the Gaza War. More than 1 year before the Gaza War, Hamas was being very, very strongly supported by who? Up north, Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. were supporting Hamas, and through Egypt there are tunnels. Now these aren't the terrorist tunnels between Israel and Gaza. These were tunnels between Egypt into Gaza, and through those tunnels, with the support of the then government, the Muslim Brotherhood, parts of military support, parts of rockets and cement were passing pretty freely through these tunnels. So Hamas was building up quite dramatically. So we get to 1 year before the Gaza war. At that point, things changed for Hamas. Due to a disagreement about the support in Syria, Hezbollah, Iran, and Syria broke off their relationship, and the Egyptian military took over from the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood, sister, loving relationship with Hamas. They pretty much are sister and brother organizations, not the Egyptian military. The Egyptian military was very much against. They flooded these tunnels and stopped the transfer. Not only did Hamas lose the ability to get weaponry and supplies through this smuggling route, 40% of their support, of their financial support, came from taxes that were collected in those transactions back and forth. So they lost that money, they lost the ability to be resupplied. And over that 1 year before the Gaza war, there was a progressive decline in the strength of Hamas. There was more desperate living conditions day by day, and it reached pretty much the bottom just before the Gaza war. But then the Gaza war came, and three things happened during the Gaza war. Now you've got to know, this is a Hamas perspective. Don't get angry at me and walk out now, okay? All right, three things happened. Number one, the rocket range. In 08-09, the rockets that came out of Gaza were able to reach 300 feet. That's one football field. We know in the third Gaza war, rockets reached nearly every major population center in Israel, including Ben Gurion Airport. Number one. Number two, the extent of the terror tunnels were not understood, we believe, were not fully understood by Israeli government and intelligence. Might have been intelligence failure, who knows? We don't have to go into that. But the extent of those tunnels was dramatic. And the nerve center of Hamas fighting was able to be buried underground within these tunnels, which created a major problem for Israel. And thirdly, the willingness of Hamas fighters to fight was very different. In 2008-09, the last time Israeli military went into Gaza, Hamas fighters retreated. This time, whether you like it or not, and how they did it, set that aside, but Hamas fought. And in fact, at the end of the Gaza war, despite all the devastation, Palestinians in Gaza believed that they had won the war. There was great celebration, and the first poll after the Gaza war ended showed Hamas, amongst all Palestinians, West Bank and Gaza, had an 88% approval rating. However, in the weeks that followed, we saw that progress on opening the borders did not happen. We saw that the hope for airport and seaport, that was something that Hamas wanted, really didn't get off on the ground. And eventually, over time, the fact there were over 2,100 deaths and over 10,000 wounded, and the devastation then certainly didn't seem worth it. And in fact, frustration grew, and hope, again, the loss of hope, returned. In the Palestinian Authority, over here we have the West Bank. Palestinian Authority with Mahmoud Abbas governs the areas within the West Bank that are administratively controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Let me just say that prior to the Kerry Initiative, there was a J Street delegation that went to Ramallah and spoke at that time. Mohammed Shtayyeh, who was one of the two Palestinian negotiators, was there. And he said, if we do not come to a two-state solution with Israel, he cannot promise that the PA will exist, and they will be able to stand, cannot promise that they'll keep quiet in the West Bank, and he believes that a third intifada, a third uprising, will probably result. despite 2/3 of Palestinians supporting the peace, this is very different to the Gaza now, despite 2/3 of Palestinians supporting the peace process, and despite the fact that the Palestinian Authority was able to maintain quiet, except for a few days of protest, maintain quiet in the West Bank when the Gaza war was going on. These are the same people, right? Here you've got a Gaza war with lots of devastation, and yet the other side of Palestinian people were able to keep quite quiet, including collecting guns so that a third intifada wouldn't start. So there was a lot of cooperation. But at the end of the process, the people were saying, well, what have you done for me? This has been, you've been talking, Mohammed Abbas and the Palestinians, you've been talking for us for so long, for at least in negotiation a decade and a half. We haven't gotten anything. In fact, the settlements are increasing, and the anti-Arab sentiment in Israel is increasing as well. So there again, frustration started creeping in, and the loss of hope in the West Bank set in. So we have a situation that, coming from after the Kerry Initiative, it was not unexpected. This path of the loss of hope and the frustration on all sides, more on the Palestinian, Gaza, and West Bank side, but the loss of hope that any peace initiative was going to work really settled in. And it isn't surprising that out of that milieu, not in an organized way, but certainly pockets of violence broke out.
I know someday it'll all turn around, 'cause all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say